Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Adams.
That's a warm welcome. Thank you.
Okay, now you gotta get your beer over here.
My beer.
There you go.
That's the brand. It's good.
Well, welcome. Can you all hear me? I talk really loud?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. You can use that, so that's good. Well, thanks for showing up. Appreciate it.
Thanks you.
So, we usually start out these conversations kind of the same. And so I'm not going to change it for tonight. So, what I would like to know is just maybe you could kind of start out, where you grew up, kind of take us through, I don't know, so you went to college. But in doing that, I want you to try to identify some of the things that you realized as you were going through your career, that or through your life at that point, if there were any things that stood out, similar to what it is that you're doing today.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, there was no venture capital in my childhood. So I grew up near Chicago. My dad was a doctor. My mother, she was an entrepreneur. She started a theater company. And I didn't really think of our family as being entrepreneurial when I was growing up. But back then, doctors, they had their own businesses. So he was a sole practitioner and had his own business. And so we kind of lived a typical suburban lifestyle. And then when I was in high school, we chucked it all and moved to Switzerland, which was cool for me because the coolest thing ever would be to go skiing and rock climbing and hanging out in Switzerland. But that totally changed my life. No longer was I, wealthy North Shore doctor's son. We kind of had to be a little more scrappy after that while we were putting things back together with a new sort of economics of unemployment for several years. So I did some things through high school to give myself opportunities to go skiing or do the things I wanted to do, and that included buying old cars. And back then you could get a car painted for $49.95 at Earl Scheib. And it was awesome. Remember Earl Scheib?
I remember Earl Scheib.
$49.95, any car, any color. It was awesome. So I used to buy cars all the time, get them shived, and sell them. It was a great way to make money both in high school and through college. And I also did the Tom Sawyer thing and started a painting company and painted houses.
Any fences?
My first big project was a fence. It took all summer.
All right.
I still kept doing it. But anyway, that was up till college.
Okay, so a little bit of adventure there. So college. Tell us about some experiences in college.
First thing I did was to leave Illinois and come to Colorado. And the irony, by the way, is I have a daughter who's looking to go to college now, and she is looking to go back to the town I left in Illinois. And that is absolute craziness, if you ask me. But I went to Colorado College down in Colorado Springs, and CC, awesome. So you're thinking, what does a venture capitalist major in? Anybody have any guess what I might have majored in?
Finance.
Finance. Philosophy. Yes, it was philosophy. Which it turns out is an awesome thing to major in if you want to be a venture capitalist. And the reason is to really analyze deals and understand how these things work, you got to have this zoom lens. You got to be able to zoom way out to 30,000 feet and sort of say, hey, what's the environment? What's the competitive situation? What's global economics doing? And then you got to zoom in and go, well, how the hell are you going to make this thing work? And what's your go-to-market strategy? And what are the nuts and bolts of your strategic plan that you're actually going to get this done? And I would say a lot of entrepreneurs are good at one of those things or the other, but not both. And if you don't have both, it's really hard to be successful.
So when did you realize that?
I don't know, 5 minutes ago.
No, you talked about that. We talked about that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So when did you realize that is an important component, which you just philosophy, whatever, and being able to kind of navigate, if you will? When did you realize that? Is it something that was just over time, or is it a retrospective, or did you kind of?
I don't think there was ever an epiphany moment, but I will say Tony was asking me, well, what was my real job I did after starting a couple of companies back in the 80s? And I had kids, got this real job, and I worked sort of in a more corporate environment with offices around the country. I had project teams, and I learned that it was really, really hard to get people who you weren't seeing every day to do what they needed to do without osmosis, you know, that sort of being next to people. If you didn't have that ability to talk at the 30,000 foot level, say, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and by the way, this is what you got to get done this week. And so that's when I really learned it, was struggling to get things done in a national environment.
Okay, cool. So when you went and got your real job, did you remember doing something before that?
The entrepreneurial job before that?
The entrepreneurial job. Well, let's talk about that one.
Yeah.
So you got into that. Tell us a little bit about how you got into that, those first entrepreneurial adventures that you did.
Sure. So, well, actually the philosophy thing didn't stop. I went up to CU to get my PhD in philosophy and kept that going. And this is back, I had a green screen IBM personal computer back then, and this is as I was doing this philosophy stuff, and I was like, oh, I get to use this computer to do this philosophy stuff. It's so cool. I had a 1200 baud modem. I could dial into the library and check out all this, 2,000-year-old stuff. It was really cool. So I became the computer expert, and ultimately I ended up going, I should get over there in the MBA program. So I left I was ABD, finished all my classes, all the dissertation in philosophy, went over to the business department, and to pay for the MBA program, started this little company building computers, just like Michael Dell did down in Texas. So he and I were doing pretty much the same thing at the same time. He did better than I did.
But you were friends, right?
Best buds.
Best buds.
He was PCs Unlimited back then. A lot of people don't remember that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you went and did the real job, and then after that real job, you went back into what was next?
So after doing 13 years, I was a CIO, Chief Information Officer, and Economics Director in this company, and had a great time. But I came back to Rockies Venture Club. I joined back in the early 90s and been an active member, and then did this other sort of period, and then came back and started volunteering. And right around then, the founders of Rockies Venture Club had been doing this for 27 years, and they were pretty much ready to retire. So it's a nonprofit organization, so they couldn't sell it. So they basically got 5 or 6 groups from around town to pitch. So I had to put together my pitch deck and pitch to the board. And one of the slides on there was a picture, I don't know if you've ever remember the Trail Dust Steakhouse with the scissors cutting off the tie. I was like, well, first of all, Rockies Venture Club used to be this thing where you go and you'd go to the Denver Athletic Club, and it was a bunch of guys in suits and ties, and I was like, well, first of all, no ties. So we had the little, the Trail Dust Steakhouse thing. And then the other slide we had was this rundown old house. It was just a totally rundown house, and it said "Fixer Upper" on it. And but it was a cool house. It was like an old Victorian, but clearly needed work. And so the message there was, I really, really liked what Rockies Venture Club had. I loved the idea of education. I loved the pitches, the entrepreneurship, the sense of community and connections people got. But it wasn't really effectively doing what it had done. It had become a bunch of attorneys and insurance salesmen selling to each other, basically. So said, hey, we got to change this. So we got rid of all those guys, well, most of them. They always come back. But we said, hey, we want to get to be about a quarter to a third investors, because that's what drives things. And then we want to have another chunk be the entrepreneurs, and then the rest would be students and volunteers, and yes, a few service providers.
So what made you come up with those metrics? Why those?
Basically, those are the 3 things that make deals happen, and the key word that I had in mind was execution. I was thinking, all of these groups that have pitch events, and this is happening every day all around America. People are pitching, and then after a pitch event, what happens? Everybody goes home, right? That's it. So for 27 years, Rockies Venture Club had people get up and they pitched, they got their hopes up, and then everybody went home. And, there's maybe some people got checks every now and then. I don't know. So we turned it into an actualized thing. We turned it into a process. We said, okay, we're going to have a monthly angel meeting. Our first meeting was great. We had 7 people, and it was me, 5 other people from Rockies Venture Club, and 1 investor. So, and he is still with us today. He's on our board of directors, and he's been in a couple of deals, or a lot of deals. So that's been good. And then 2 months later, we had our Angel Capital Summit, and suddenly we had like 50 investors. And it just went up and up and up from there. And we became very process oriented. Trying investors needed education as much as the entrepreneurs. We always think, you know, oh, we have to teach the entrepreneurs about valuation and exit strategies and deal structure and all of that. Turns out most of the investors are super smart guys, and they're CEOs of companies, but they don't necessarily know how venture funding works or how to do all of the ins and outs. So there's a safety and numbers thing, and we've built an education program for them, and it's been a lot of fun.
So in doing that program and putting that together, what are some of the things that you guys, that you and your team, your big team, right?
All 3 of us.
How did you capture, how did you learn? What was the learning process to make that process better? What are some of the things that you looked at, maybe some metrics, for example, or input that you wanted to get in order to make it better the next time?
Well, that's a great question, because if you'd asked me at the beginning, what are we going to teach? You know, I knew we were going to do a pitch academy because we had to teach people how to give effective pitches. But it was really just by watching deals happen or not happen and looking at where the friction points were. And there's always friction points, and sometimes it was, most of the time it was due to a lack of knowledge. And then, you know, you start to look at, well, what kinds of lack of knowledge? And the first one, of course, that jumps out is valuation. You've got entrepreneurs who are, you know, it's 2 guys eating ramen noodles in a basement with their dog, and they're like, yeah, it's worth $10 million. And you're like, huh. Maybe the dog, 9.9, and the rest, I don't know. So valuation was clearly a problem. And, you know, you're getting into these negotiations, and it's big money. I mean, you're tossing around millions of dollars one way or the other, and you need a language and a process to talk about how that valuation works. So that was the first sort of big thing beyond Pitch Academy that was important.
Okay. So with that valuation, there's, I wouldn't say there's many methods or whatever. So when you talk to somebody or someone's talking about valuation, what are some of the advice or the things that you guys teach to help people understand that?
Well, yeah, well, this is 2.5 hours, so how are you guys doing here? Well, here's the big principle is, I get people who call me all the time, and you know, they're saying, hey, I got this great deal, Peter, you know, please let me pitch, and you know, the investors are going to love this. And we start talking about valuation and say, oh, well, you know, we're early stage, so you know, you can't do valuation for that. And you know, so then you say, well, how much are you trying to raise? Well, you know, $500,000. And you go, well, what percentage of the equity are you giving up? Well, 25%. I go, well, you just did valuation. You know, you do the math, right? They were 1.5 million pre, 2 million post, and that's what you just did, whether you like it or not. So that's simple math. So people are doing valuation and they don't really realize it. But everybody says, oh, well, we're going to do convertible debt, we'll kick the can down the road. But of course, investors will want to have a valuation cap on that, which means basically, what's your valuation? So it always comes back to, you've got to do it. So anyway, what Tony was going for is, when in early stage, your uncertainty is this big. I would go like this, except you couldn't hear me. It's huge. I mean, there are a million things that can go wrong, and you know, we all know your pro forma is not going to happen the way you got it. Your strategy is not going to work the way you have it. But we hope that you have a smart team and a great, huge market and a great product, and it's going to work out. So how do we take all of that giant uncertainty and put it into a little package? So what we figured out is, I went through about 300 different valuation models, and none of them worked. And the reason was they looked at valuation from one angle or another, and with uncertainty so huge, it just doesn't work. So we figured out, oh, well, let's look at what the big categories of valuation are. And some are based, 2 or 3 of them are based on exit. How much am I going to get at the end? And that's, of course, the investor's big question. How am I going to get my money back, and what kind of multiple? So exit-based valuations, that's 2 or 3 of them. And then the others are like comp-based, where we're looking at, well, what's everybody else getting? People don't think about this. They sort of have this tunnel vision. Oh, I got this company. It's so cool. It's going to have a $100 million exit. But they don't realize that there's a whole lot of other companies saying the exact same thing. And the metaphor I give is investing in companies is kind of like going to King Soopers and investing in a loaf of bread. There's like this whole shelf. There must be like 100 different kinds of bread. And some are like $2 and some are $5. And then you get some valuation methods that are, it's like a $50 loaf of bread. You're like, well, I'd never buy that one, right? But the point is, if you compare to the other, loaves of bread, i.e. the other companies out in the market, you'd say, well, in Colorado, the average startup is going for about $2.5 million. So you can start from there, and then we have a methodology that it's kind of like a real estate appraisal that, adds and subtracts based on square footage or number of bathrooms. You add and subtract based on the strength of the team, based on the size of the market, the quality of the product, all of these sorts of things that would give you variability.
So you and I talked a little bit about exit. Some
Yep.
people don't want to talk about it or don't know what that really means or whatever, but explain, maybe all of you know, I don't know, but explain to us from an exit perspective, what is it you need, first of all, what that really means. Second, how you may go through that process to determine what that exit's going to be, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah. So, has anybody read 7 Habits of Highly Successful People? Anybody remember number 2? Begin with the end in mind?
Yeah.
So, that's a habit of highly successful people and a habit of highly successful startups. So, if you don't know what you're working towards, you don't really know where you're going. People always say, oh, well, just kind of build a good market and, then the exit will come. Bullshit. I'm investing money in this. I'm not going to take a risk on maybe somebody will come along, but we don't even know who it is or why we would have value. Knowing exactly what your exit strategy is really, really important. And people don't understand why that's important. But here's a couple of reasons. One is, of course, you can't do valuation without knowing what your exit strategy is. You need to look at who all the companies are who are doing acquiring in your space. Who's going to be doing the acquiring in 5 years? What are you going to have that they don't have that would make them really excited to acquire you? And then you look at all the multiples, and you can say, well, what multiples are they getting acquired for? And so now you know where you have to be driving your revenues to, and then you have to look at what the typical acquisition amounts are. I had one company a couple of years ago who said, oh yeah, we're going to have an exit for $500 million. And it was a little SaaS company that did point of sale stuff for restaurants. And I was like, well, the biggest company in your industry does $3.5 billion. So their typical acquisition is 30 to 35 million. So they're clearly not going to pay 15 times the average to acquire your company. So understanding what the norms are gives you huge leverage in talking to investors and knowing what your strategy should be and where you need to build to. So tons of reasons why it's important, but valuation is one, strategy is another. And the third is, I like to say a company, people always say you need to know who your customer is. And if you look at the amount of dollars you're going to get from your customers who buy whatever your product is, it's probably less than the amount of dollars you get from your acquirer or from your IPO. Think about that for a second. More dollars will come from your acquirer or your IPO. So who's your most important customer? The guy who buys your widget or the guy who buys your company? The guy who buys your company. And who's the most important customer to the investor? The guy who buys your customer or your company, because investors don't get a penny for those widgets. You might be throwing a couple $1 million to the bottom line every year. Investors don't get that. That stays in the company until we get an exit. So it's all about the exit.
That's your point. So, it's just a lot of people come to these things and they're doing their startups, they're in a startup, they're looking for money, they're trying to figure out where to go, they're trying to say whether it's bootstrap it, friends or family, whatever. What are some of the advices that you guys give or go through that process to determine what's the best thing? Do I go that route? Do I go that route plus an angel? Find that, or VC, or strategic, whatever. How do you look at that?
Well, that's easy. It depends.
It depends.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, so the first rule is avoid venture capital. right? That's seriously. It is. I get people coming to me who have bankable deals where they can, they have a whole bunch of receivables or something, and they're like, oh, I need venture capital to grow so I can grow my business. And I'm like, that is insane. Venture capital, here's something most people don't know. The return on investment a VC wants to get is 60% IRR, internal rate of return. 60%. So that's a lot. So if you can get, factoring for your receivables for 20%, it sounds like, oh, that's expensive credit card rate. That is cheap. That's 1/3 of the rate of what a VC needs. And why does a VC need that? Because they're going to go belly up on 1/3 of those deals. 1/3 of them will be walking dead, and a couple will do nicely, and one will be the home run. And so the understanding the economics of a VC is really important for anybody starting up a company to see if your deal makes sense. Most of the people I talk to, I say, hey, you should not be talking to VC. You should be, here's 5 other places you can go to. So that's the first rule. So the other is, these things happen in phases. There's a common life cycle of a company. And angel investors, which is sort of the world I work in most of the time, we're like little mini VCs. We need the 10X because guess what? The super early stage things fail even more than the later stage things. So the economics work over a portfolio, you might make about 25% after everybody's, the end of the day. But people who start should start with credit cards, their savings, friends and family. That's obviously, what you need to do. And those people, that's one place where convertible debt is a good way to raise money from these folks. And people raise between $25,000 and $250,000 that way. And by the time you come to an angel group, who's, once again, like a venture capitalist, they expect that you've got a lot of traction. So you've already spent $25,000 to $250,000. You've got something going. You've got an MVP, something that's maybe on the cusp of revenues within 6 months or so. And once you're at that stage, and you can really show somebody that you've de-risked the deal quite a bit, and it's not just an idea, it's a real thing, you've got real customers or real whatever, then you can come to the angels. And so the range for angels is $250,000 to $2 million. So that's going to be 20 to 30% of your company for that $250,000 to $2 million. And then that'll last you about 18 months, and then you'll go to a VC, and then you'll raise $3 to $5 million. You'll give up another 20 to 30%, and then you'll do that for another 18 months, and then you'll get $10 million for another 20 to 30%. And these don't add up. You might say, but Peter, by then you're over 100%. But each of those dilutes the previous one. So you can have 4 rounds of 25%, and you still own 20% of the company. So it's not as bad as it sounds. But anyway, so that's how it works. And then Tony mentioned strategics. Well, in some industries, strategics are super important, like in life sciences and healthcare. Strategics are, we have this periodic table of investors, and there's this giant blue section in the middle that are the strategics. So you get people like Covidian or Medtronic, and they are investing in these companies right and left, and with the hope that they would be acquiring them later. So they've got their exit strategy all wrapped up, but they are investing more than VCs. Last year in life science, it was like $8.2 billion just in life science. And a huge chunk of that came from the strategics.
So do you see in the marketplace today in different areas that people are doing startups, more strategic for this type of marketplace or type of startup versus this one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So and life science is one of those where it's huge relative to other industries. And when you think about it, well, you have all of these drug development projects that take 7 to 10 years, or devices that may or may not work or may not get FDA approval. So the strategics are jumping in right at the cusp of getting FDA approval, because I just learned this last week. FDA is going to make Medtronic go through a lot of hoops in order to get their FDA approval. But if it's some guy in the basement eating ramen noodles with their dog, they say, well, we can't do that. So they'll be nicer to these little companies, and then Medtronic can come up and snap them up. So there's sort of a strategy to that. Other industries, we did a LOHAS Natural Food and Beverage Conference last year. Not as much. They're going to wait until somebody's got market penetration, and then they'll come in.
So do you see, okay, with that said, some of them come in based off of some progress that those companies have made, right?
Yep.
In most cases, the strategics, right?
And every industry is different. So all the rules, all the multiples, you know, we do a cannabis conference now. You know, all those multiples are just, you know, skyrocketed through the roof. It doesn't compare to anything else.
So that goes back to the years of the internet part, right? The 90s.
Yeah. It's like the internet bubble, but with bud.
Yep.
Hitter bud.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so when, going back to the philosophy thing and about the, the study of the people and the way they think, there's been a lot of discussion about when a company comes that people are not investing so much in the product, they're investing in the people. So would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So if I'm starting doing a startup and everything, what are the key ingredients for people that I need to have, you think? It's kind of a broad question, but what do you see as being kind of the key people that really are going to make or break whether they're going to get a deal?
So a couple of things. For me, one of the things I really like to see is somebody in the executive suite who has done it before, and by it, I mean worked for a venture-backed company. If you've worked for Medtronic, you know, I don't care about that as much as if you work for a venture-backed company, because Medtronic is not doubling every year with no resources. You know, I want somebody who understands, hey, we got nothing, we got to double for 5 years. That's what it means to get 60% IRR. So not a lot of people understand how that works or have the stamina to make it happen. So that's number one. I will say that last week I was told that 12% of companies with past CEOs of venture-backed companies actually succeed. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe they're all thinking, oh, I did it before, so I just have to do the same thing again, but the circumstances are different. So number one, I like somebody who's been in a venture-backed company. They understand the speed, the scaling, and all of that. The second is they know how the relationship to investors works. A lot of people are afraid of investors, and they shouldn't be. They should understand how it works and what the relationship is, and it can be a very positive relationship. So understanding that and then knowing what investors need. We have some people who fall apart. You know, they get great pitches, investors are all over it, and then they say, this due diligence stuff sucks. They keep asking me for documents and stuff, and I don't have that. And then, you know, it kind of shows, oh, they don't know, you know, the check hasn't even been written yet, much less cleared, and they don't get how the relationship's going to work.
So what are some of those things they ask? What are some things that during that diligence process that they ask? So due diligence, so there's two big principles I have for you, due diligence. And one is, especially with angel investing, this is a momentum game. You want to get everybody going really, really fast, and you've got to have all of your ducks in a row in order for that to happen. You can't be giving the pitch and then saying, okay, what would you like to know? Because they're going to ask you for, like, we have a checklist of 100 documents. And those have everything from your articles of incorporation to your employment agreements to vesting agreements where you might take shares over 4 years. And it takes lawyers weeks and weeks and weeks to do all those things. So if you don't have your ducks in a row, it's probably 2-3 months before you can actually start to take investment. So having everything all lined up beforehand. And then, of course, the investors are like, oh, cool, these guys understand what we need. We've got it all in a Dropbox. There's 14 common folders. You can drop all those. You don't have to do all 100, but 63, whatever it is. You got it all in. And then the investor's like, oh, okay, well, chances are they're not even going to look at half of them because they're like, oh, these people are pretty thorough. They're dotting their I's and crossing their T's. So that's the speed and preparation are probably the two most important things with the due diligence process. So being in this business, doing this for a long time, do you see that there is a more of a tolerance or less of a tolerance today versus, let's say, the 90s? Tolerance for what? Tolerance for risk on both sides. Tolerance for, I'm going to invest, I'm an investor, I'm going to invest. I have a little more tolerance to give these people a little more time or less time. I mean, is it different, do you think? So, I would think back to when I was
starting businesses in the 80s and how hard it was to raise money. And then I think about people who are raising money now, and it's really hard. So nothing has changed in that regard. But a lot has changed about the process, because there were angels who were just individual, your doctor, your dentist, or somebody who had an exit or whatever. They were around, but they weren't organized, and it was really hard to find them and really hard to get them to do anything. And now it's more process driven. So it's really good. Around the state of Colorado, people are starting to get more organized. We're investing in the state, we're creating jobs, all of that stuff is happening. But with that, the bar has gone way up. So when I think about the pitches I saw in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and now, the pitches are up here. It is really, really professional what people are doing. They have a lot of thought. They've done all the homework behind. And you can't just get up with 20 slides in 15 minutes and raise $1 million anymore. You really.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, a lot of it is people are seeing a lot more deals. So if at Rockies Venture Club, we pitch 80 to 100 deals a year. And so your average angel is looking at 10 or so deals a month. And if you're comparing back to the loaves of bread, you're going to say, well, I'm not going to take that one because it's just fine. You're going to say, no, I just want the number 10 one. I want the awesome one that's going to have the huge returns and is more de-risked and bigger market and farther along than the other ones. So. And who tells a story better and has shinier slides and all of that stuff. But all of those things go into the package. So I would say people who pitch now have to spend maybe a half a year in getting all the strategy done, all the documents done, all the practicing the pitch, and then doing it poorly, and then they're ready to do it in front of the people who are really important.
So today, start to actual signed deal.
So
I'm sitting here in my garage with my friend and my dog, and I come up with an idea.
So start to pitching is about a year. Year depends on the thing. Some people have been doing it for 5. Depends on how complex the deal is. But a year to 5 years in developing the thing. But most people a year or two is to the point where they get ready to pitch. So let's say now you've done all the homework and you've got an awesome pitch. From the pitch to getting the check can be anywhere from the shortest I've seen is maybe 3 weeks, and the average is maybe 3 months. And in that 3 months, you're pitching, if it's angel investing, it's not like just one VC who's got to get on board. I got to get you and you and you and you and you, and you got to all agree on the same terms. And if you, the last guy, want to change the terms, I got to go back to you and start all over again, because the term sheet has to be the same for all of the investors. And we do deals now that are in California and New York, and then RVC is leading them. And man, talk about cat herding. We have to get 50 or so people organized in Colorado, and then another 20 or 30 in California, another 20 or 30 in New York. It can take a long time to get that done. But I've seen it take up to 6 or 9 months. Average is maybe 3 months after pitch before you get the check.
So are you a proponent of having a predetermined term sheet to give to your future investors?
I think smart entrepreneurs who are going out to angel investors will have a term sheet right in their pocket, ready to just give to those guys. This isn't really a term sheet. So yeah, they'll have it. And the reason is, you're talking to people, that's another friction point, right? Why would you wait for some investor to go spend 2 weeks and $5,000 with an attorney? Why not make it easy for them? You've got the term sheet, give it to your dentist. He doesn't even know what a term sheet is. If you go to a VC, you will of course use the VC's term sheet. VCs will always give you their own term sheet. But if you're going to angels, start with your own. Doesn't mean you'll get the terms that are on the term sheet, but at least you've got that great starting place. And there's a ton of templates out there. You think, hey, how do I write this? There are a ton of templates out there. Do get an attorney, but do all the work beforehand. Figure out what you think the valuation is. Have all that work done. Look at other deals, not just the blank ones that you can get on the internet, but if you know people who've done deals, look at how their deals went, and look at how your deals compare, and then that's how you prepare your sample term sheet.
when do you think you should start getting an attorney involved?
Actually, at the very beginning is when you should do it. And partly it's because once you start having partners and different people working on things, suddenly you get somebody who goes off to California, and by then you haven't done this, writing up the agreements and non-competes and all of this stuff. You can become a billionaire, and then they come back and say, oh, well, by the way, I started that company, I get a third. That's that whole social media thing, the Facebook movie. That's what happened there. So yeah, you need the attorneys right up front. You need to understand why vesting is your friend and not your enemy, and how you should get a vesting program going so everybody gets their shares over a period of time instead of all at once.
What's your thought about, there's events around town that, I'm looking for a CTO, I'm looking for a CFO, I'm looking for a blank. Do you find that to be, in your experience with people you do you find that to be helpful or not helpful, or would you recommend that, or how would you go about if someone is trying to do that? How would they do that? What would be
well, those are actually great. I think they're very helpful, and you got to find people who you know, or who people you know. I must make 2 or 3 introductions a day, so I'm always connecting people with other people, because I see people who have incomplete teams. They can't get funding without somebody, so that's super important. So get to know the connectors, get known by them, and then that's a great way to get connected to the right people. And by the way, we didn't finish up the thing about the team. That's so important is, people have these slides, and they have, like I just saw one last night, and it just says, here's Bob, he's the CEO. I was like, this tells me nothing. This is a really stupid slide. And an even worse one that I saw a couple months ago, not to pick on these decks, but they have, Larry, and he's like, hey, I'm a Frisbee Ultimate Champion, and this is my dog, Bud. I'm like, the team slide is the most important slide of your deck, and it should go at within the last 3 slides of the deck. And why is that? It's because by then people know what you're trying to accomplish, and then you can show that you have the people on the team who have the expertise to do what it is you said you were going to do. If you have it at the beginning, we're like, oh, that's a bunch of PhDs and MBAs, that's great, but I don't know if that matters or not. Have it at the end, we're like, oh, cool, this is impressive,
So
this is what we need.
It's important to have that slide in. For sure.
Yeah, and not your dog, and not the Frisbee stuff, it's important.
So what should be the first slide?
So, first slide is the most important slide, and there's a saying, you only have one chance to make a first impression, and this is so true in the pitch deck. Watch the audience in a pitch event, and after the first 30 seconds, people start getting out their iPhones and checking their email, and if they're not hooked in the first 30 seconds, you've lost them. So you've got to really grab people, and it's like, here's a kitten, and we've got a cure for kitten cancer. Everybody's like, oh, okay, that's, I would save that little kitten. Something really important, and you got to grab people with that this is big. The other thing that I always say is you got to create a conceptual framework right up front. I say you got to build a box that everything you say gets put into, because some pitches, we get 2.5 minutes into a 5-minute pitch, I still don't even know what the company does, and that's ridiculous. I've just lost half of the time. So your first slide, it grabs and engages people, it tells people what you do, and then it leads into everything else that you're going to talk about. So and the other thing is it's your chance to cheat. And entrepreneurs love cheating, right? So how do you cheat with it? Well, some people just have, XYZ Corporation pitching to Rockies Venture Club, February 2015. I'm like, I know the date. I know I'm Rockies Venture Club. I know you're XYZ Corp. You just wasted all this time because, usually the slide is up there for like as much as a minute before the guy finally gets up, and, we do the timer right when you start saying, hi, I'm Bob. So you can have that slide working for you for a whole minute beforehand of your 5-minute pitch. And then your last slide, equally important, right? Because it's going to be up there for 5 minutes during the Q&A. And a lot of people say, thank you, Bob at XYZ Corp. I know you're Bob. I got your contact info here. Why not put up your highlights of your deck? Why not say, here's our deal, here's our market, here's why we're important. And then that way when people are trying to think of a question because they feel bad for you because nobody's asking. They're like, oh, well, there's something I could ask a question about. So you're reinforcing your whole thing, and it's up there for 5 minutes. Isn't that cool? That's free.
So what are the craziest? I want to say crazy. Maybe that's not the right word. What are some of the most interesting pitches you've seen? You don't have to pick one. You can pick a couple. Let's start with that one.
Yeah. Well, the interesting ones aren't always the best. The first time I ever.
And you went, oh my God.
So here I am. I take over Rockies Venture Club, and I have 3 weeks to put on the first pitch event with 120 people and 4 companies pitching. We have panels with 6 people on it and all this stuff. And so we have to organize all this and catering and alcohol and licensing. So I'm trying to figure this out. I've never done this before. And also I have to put together a curriculum for Pitch Academy and teach people how to pitch. So this one guy says, oh, I am a public speaker. I have done public speaking all across the country. I don't need your stinking Pitch Academy. He's like, well, okay. It's my first time. I don't know. This guy was the worst pitch ever. He gets his kid up on the stage, skateboarding back and forth, and we're like going, huh. And it's some like bottled water product, which is, and then it had some hook that hooked on his skateboard jacket. So clearly a total distraction. No, not a good thing. So anyway, that was my first pitch event. As the head of RVC.
What's the best?
So, well, I don't know. The best is once. Well, you know what? It is interesting. I would say it's probably only about 1 in 20 pitches I see where I kind of have this. I just want to get up and write a check. Right? There's something that is compelling about that pitch. And it just hits me all the way through. It's logical. It builds. It's compelling. It's well researched. It's everything's validated in the way that they talk. They're not just making up a bunch of stuff. And I see ones like that, and I'm like, this is a deal that we've got to get in on.
So is that more the person or the information?
All of it. It's a package. Yeah. That kind of information doesn't come from the wrong kind of person.
So the other question I have for you is future. We've seen a lot of trends, at least here in Colorado, a lot of transformation here in the Denver, Boulder kind of Front Range area. There's a lot of activity going on, investors coming in. So first of all, with that said, there's been discussion, I've had discussions with people in this room about this, about more investors coming to Colorado. And staying here, and putting money into Colorado. What do you think the trend is there? It's getting a little better, but what can we do to make that better, more?
Yeah. Well, that's super important. Colorado, you guys probably already know this, but per capita, we have 4 of the top 10 startup cities in the country. So we're cranking out lots of really good. And we have mobilized probably fewer than 1,000 of our angel investors out of tens of thousands of people who could be doing this. So we have a problem here in the state, but we also have a problem because we're perceived as a flyover state. And we got to. If the people don't stop here, at least their dollars should, right? This is important. So how do we do that? And there's some important things. Obviously within the state, we've started to mobilize. So now, RVC, we're all up and down with chapters in the Springs and Fort Collins and Boulder and Denver. And so we syndicate within the state, but now we're starting to syndicate with other groups around the country. And so we're bringing in money from other angel groups who are seeing these great Colorado deals. Colorado's reputation is starting to really, have some impact. And people are like, oh yeah, we'd like to see these deals, especially in things like digital health. We're number 6 in the country in terms of digital health companies. So that's awesome. But then the other thing is, and this is something Rockies Venture Club is doing, is working on syndicating these deals on AngelList. So for example, we'll put together a syndicate here in Colorado, and then we'll put it out on AngelList, and that allows people from all around the country to participate in these Colorado deals.
Do you see that continuing? You're looking through your crystal ball, do you see that getting bigger in the next 10 years?
Yeah, it's getting bigger so fast you wouldn't believe. It's a graph that's going like this. So just angel groups, which is just, that's the 1.0, right?
Right.
We had fewer than 100 angel groups in the US 10 years ago, and now there's over 600. So that 10 years, 600% increase. And then the number of deals we're going to start to see where people can be pointing and clicking on angel list syndicates, that's just going to go up, I think, with similar rates of acceleration. So I think that's all going to be huge. And then the whole Jobs Act, and then Shark Tank. Everybody's like, hey, I want to be a shark. I want to do that. And then it's sort of a cool thing to your cocktail party. Well, which one did you go for? So it's a social thing too.
My daughter, my little one, is a huge Shark Tank fan. I mean, she tapes them, she watches them. We sit there and watch them. I just think it's kind of funny. But what do you think about that whole show? I'm just curious.
Well, it's a great show, but I call that venture-tainment. And if somebody used that as a way to learn about investing, they would not be doing well. That show violates pretty much every principle of ethics and good investing that I could ever think about. And I'll give you an example. There's a lot of things where investors think they're so clever or they're negotiating a great deal, but when you get 60% of a company, you think, oh, I just got 60% of the company for 150 grand. What a bunch of suckers. Well, you've just bought a company that has no chance of becoming one of those big gazelle companies, right? Because, where does this number 20 to 30% per round come from? Well, it comes from, it takes 3 or 4 rounds for a company to be successful. Like Lending Club, just had their IPO. They had like 10 rounds, before they had their IPO. So if you take all of that powder at the first round, you don't have the ability to keep going. So that, angel or shark is actually what they're, who took 60%, he just, gave himself no chance of getting a 10x return on that investment.
Well, I'm going to take a few questions.
Great.
I'm going to take a couple questions. Maybe I have a couple questions for Peter. Come on, you guys have something. Yes.
So I heard that you put these 3 C's as venture capital. You put the capital, you put the commercial plan. You need to see actually how we're going to be selling this stuff, and then you put the CEO. Is that true? I mean, which one is for you the most important?
Yeah. So how do you rank those? So CEO is probably the first because they're going to drive the other things, right? So the number one risk you've got in investing in these companies is execution. So everybody's got this idea, and we had a pitch. I won't say the company, but it was last month before last. And we asked, well, tell us about your go-to-market strategy. How are you going to sell this? And they said, well, it's going to go viral. That's good. But then, you press the CEO and say, well, how are you going to make it go viral? And then they're like, well, it's everybody will see that it's very useful.
Maybe he wasn't the Ebola.
Well, I went viral, yes. Very good. Anyway, so yeah, CEO is the most important, and the rest of the team, that it's balanced. I see a lot of CEOs who are tech CEOs. They understand the technology, and that's really good in that first year or two, right? Because you're developing something, you know the market, you know the need, maybe you've got sector expertise, but now this has got to shift. And in that 18 to 24 month, it's got to shift to being a marketing organization. So you got to know how to sell. You got to sell, and that is one of the biggest weaknesses in a company. So that's the commercialization part, right? And then the third part, that you mentioned, you said, kind of gave it backwards, capital. So, we started this thing talking about zooming in and out, right? Well, a lot of times, one of the biggest faults I see in people trying to raise money is they're looking, if you think about a gymnast, if they looked at their toes doing the balance beam, they would not be successful. They look at the end of the beam, they focus on that, they can do their tricks. Well, that's what a good entrepreneur does. That's sort of the beginning with the end in mind. But a good finance capital plan involves, okay, kind of what I walked through. Okay, we're going to raise $500,000 now for 25%, then 3 to 5 million, that's our go-to-market initially, and then 10 million is global domination, and prepare for IPO. But you need to know what those are, and you need to be able to show your investors what their dilution is going to be at each of those stages, and then how those people at every stage are going to get their desired return on investment. So, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think the likelihood of majority of companies doing an IPO on this first time? Like,
Oh yeah, it's tiny. We have 2 right now that are IPO bound, but it's 2%, 1% of companies. You know, no. I mean, of course, most of them are go out of business bound, but the others are acquisition bound is the goal.
question in the back, yes.
Yeah, how do you get involved in Rockies?
How do you get involved in Rockies Venture?
Yeah, so, I as an entrepreneur, I have a product, I'm finishing up the MVP now, seasoned veteran, how do I get involved, how do I join you?
Excellent question. I've got a slide I do on this every single month. So there are 5 ways you can get involved with Rockies Venture Club. Start by going to rockiesventureclub.org. We are a nonprofit, and there you can see we do 100 events a year. 100 events a year. So those are a combination of a conference every month and classes and angel meetings and mastermind sessions. So I'll just pause on the mastermind sessions because that is group mentoring. We meet with about 20 people every month. It sells out way in advance, and our brand is we solve everybody's problem. They come in with a problem, we solve them all. So that's a really great thing for people who are getting ready because you want to test your ideas. Go into the mastermind, and there's investors there, there's entrepreneurs, there's professors, all of that. So that's a good thing. So anyway, go check out the calendar, get involved with those things. You can become a member. It's not required. We are a membership organization. It's $125 to join, and that just gives you discounts on stuff. It's half off for the monthly events and things like that. But you don't have to. You can pay double. It's fine with us. And then the third is you can volunteer. A lot of people get involved with RVC. We've got about 80 volunteers. There's no way we can put on 100 events and put together millions of dollars worth of deals without having lots of volunteers. So we have, any expertise you might have, everything from, being a Twitter pro to marketing to finance, whatever it is. That's the things. And then finally, you could apply to pitch. And there's an apply to pitch button. You fill out a profile, and every month we have a screening team. They pick the companies who are going to pitch, and it's a rolling deal. So if you don't get picked one month, it might, we keep people going until they get a chance to pitch. So that's a good.
What's that criteria?
So we have a rubric you can look at. It's transparent, and it's kind of all the things we've just been talking about. Every deal is different. It's kind of like one of those audio mixing dials. You have some things that are up at 10 and 4 or 3. For me, it's about team and it's about exit. It's about the finance, it's about the size of market. But it's a mix. It's kind of an alchemy for every deal, and I don't think there's a lot of people who try to quantify it all, and I don't think it can be done.
And what do you think of solo founders?
I think they should get some partners. Yeah, it almost never will solo founders get funded. They'll fall apart in the due diligence. This is big. You're going to grow 100% or more every year for 5 years. You've got, even if you had 5 people, that's not very many. If you have the 5 people, then we want to see you've got strategic partnerships of bigger companies that you're going to sell through, or have those sorts of things. So it's all about leverage, because you are a tiny company and you're going to grow to 50 million in sales in 5 years and exit for 250 million. You can't do that by one guy.
Question. Yes, go ahead.
Peter, how important is story and the quality of your design of your slides in your pitch?
So when we started doing this, we used to have those clickers, or then we did the iPhone things. You type it in, and we asked 2 questions: quality of pitch and quality of the business opportunity. And most of the time they correlated pretty well, but occasionally it was a 1 to 5 scale. Occasionally you get one that was a 2 and a 5. And the pitch just sucked. And then you're like, but I still want to talk to that guy because I think there's something there. It's important. Story is important. I think one mistake people make is they think they're talking finance. And because they're looking for money and they're talking about those financial guys and they can write checks. And at the end of the day, yeah, that's what you're doing. But really you're talking to people. And people are engaged by story. And so story is the most important way to get the finance to happen.
Well, I appreciate y'all showing up tonight. appreciate them here.
I did bring a book for somebody.
Oh, you want to give it away?
Yeah, I'd like to give it away.
That's the question. We're going to give a book away.
Yeah, so, let's say, who knows what Lending Club's valuation is at their IPO? I'm going to give it to 7.25. It was $8.2 billion, and it's a 7-year-old company who grew to be really big, really fast. Yeah. So, signed copy. All right, thanks everybody. That was great questions.
So thank you very much for showing up tonight.
Thank you, Tony.
So you guys can hang around till 9 o'clock, and we're going to be here. So thank you again for showing up.